Good morning, and thank you for joining today. We will be talking and discussing today about the very fundamentals of what it means to be human, how we learn and how we create, and in particular how we learn and create together with machines. My name is Katariina Wisakanto, and I'm Risks from Global Systems and AI Safety researcher and visiting scholar at the Level Home Center for the Future of Intelligence. Today I will be presenting to you some questions, I hope, on how human cognition and creation can work hand in hand with machines. We will have a look at impact of global AI systems, some comments on cascades and society, how the system impacts trickle down at individual and societal level, discuss cognition and norms. I will talk a little bit about where we are with AI today, if indeed we are, as Bill Gates said, in the age of AI. If this is the hinge, and in particular I will be talking about the last 3 weeks, which have been particularly exciting. And after this we will go on to discuss creativity in the 21st century, human and AI team competencies, and perhaps what is very central to the work today and onwards, a little bit about the difference between reacting and responding to these technological changes. So what do we mean by global AI systems? Let's first have a look at what traditional decision-making looks like on the human side. If we think of the history of humanity, the way we have transferred knowledge between each other, we have started off with speaking, with poems, with legends, with written form of knowledge, which has been our ways of passing on knowledge over the generations, so transferring local and temporal distances. And in the instances where we have had many competing trains of thought or concepts or ideas, we have discussed with each other, we have debated, we have converged on certain ideas that we hold through. So for example, in this room, if we talk long enough, I'm sure we will converge on an idea or two, hopefully about creativity and AI today. But also in instances where we discover something new, like quantum mechanics, we often diverge to explore different strains of thought. And of course, in parallel, we might have different schools of thought, conspiracy theories and the like. But in this very robust human knowledge system, we have this back and forth of knowledge. And this is true both on an individual and collective level. So us as individuals, we often have conflicting systems of thought. There might be some cognitive dissonance sometimes. When we make decisions on the spot, we usually need to choose where our values are and what is the sort of thought that we then, or fact, we converge on. Also, when the scientific method made an entrance, we had the amazing opportunity to do a lot of experiments, empirical experiments, and we could sort of, on a larger scale, converge on side ideas. For example, that doctors should wash their hands between patients. That seemed reasonable to us, that this was something to converge on and not particularly diverge on. And worthy of note here is that this way of social knowledge gathering, while of course very different on different parts of the world and depending on what granularity level we're looking at, individual or small group or large group, it is more robust at the sort of human timescales that we are looking at, in the sense of that there are limitations and boundaries to what thoughts and ideas can take shape and propagate. If we look at machine decision making instead, it is the case that the machine learning algorithms converge and diverge. It is the case that the machine learning algorithms converge and diverge knowledge as well, but the difference here being that the convergence happens somewhere quite arbitrary. So when we have good data, the convergence happens exactly where we expect it to. But when we have sparse data or we have conflicting data sources, the convergence can happen in an arbitrary place as well as the divergence. So we are suddenly in this situation where we don't know the insides of these black box models, and we don't really have a social feeling of where a convergence happens. And this can have quite a lot of societal effects beyond what we are seeing today at length. Here on the right, you see a graph of sort of many trajectories of thought. And when exposed to a machine learning system or in interaction with such, we see that sort of the ideas converge at some arbitrary points when they interact with these systems. This is a very simple illustration, but what often is spoken about in terms of creativity and AI as well is that it's not possible to create unique content. It's not possible to create something very innovative, something sort of very human and creative. And this is often the connection that people are talking about. But of course, now that we are moving on towards generative multimodal AI models, we start seeing that this as well is something that we can start to question, but the dynamic is still very interesting. At a societal level then, a global AI system could either be an assembly of many AIs, which we are seeing today, or it could be one dominant AI system governing sort of global humanity. What's interesting and challenging is that these many systems feed back into each other. I'm not sure how many of you have had the opportunity to play with GPT-4 yet, but in the current strategy, there is a plan to roll out new capabilities as weeks go on, first for the ChatGPT Plus users, and then for everybody. And the model will take text and video and images and audio, and will be able to output this as well. I suspect you can all imagine what can happen if you put in a text prompt and want to get an output for a short video, perhaps 7 seconds. Perhaps you'll plug it into TikTok or other video application. And you can suddenly start seeing that when several of these systems are connected to each other, we can have quite distinct cascading effects with impacts that are not very visible to us yet. Something which was a conversational topic about 10 years ago now was the European Commission's right to be forgotten, which was quite interesting. I don't know how many of you recall this. So if you had a Facebook account or Google account, you could contact these companies and ask to take out your data. This is not the case anymore. If you remove your data from Facebook or remove your data from Google, your data is still out there in all these other interconnected systems. And as a society, the right to be forgotten was something we simply have not even discussed. There is also a case of the right to an open future. So as more and more these systems get interconnected, we'll start seeing more and more sort of trajectories forcing us into certain life routes. So what do we know about human AI teams' cognition norms at a individual collective level? Well, firstly, in traditional programming, or if we're using a calculator or similar, we would have the input we wanted to put into the computation together with our program. We would have the rules and the data we wanted to input, and we would get some sort of a result. What we are seeing today instead is that we are putting in the input together with the desired result when we train these models. And this, as we can understand, has a lot of interesting impacts. For example, as many people have observed, large language models contain human-like biases on what is right and wrong to do. There has been some talks about creating a conservative GPT-3, for example, because the current models have been considered to be too liberal. Just as there is discussion of sort of that there is Wikipedia and that there is conservative Wikipedia, because these systems store the knowledge and the very values that we want to harness. Of course, even for this, we have a tech solution. A proposed solution is that we might perhaps just ask the language models to unbias themselves for us, which I always find is very interesting. Okay, so then let's zoom out a little bit again and discuss humanity's space of ideas. So if we then imagine all these strains of thought we were discussing earlier, and we imagine them encompassing this arbitrary space, what might happen then when we interact with machine learning systems which converge on arbitrary points is that we might see ourselves in a situation where on the left we have knowledge system of all the ideas humanity is capable of encompassing, and on the right we notice that we have this space of ideas, but suddenly we notice that some ideas are inside or outside the gamut. This is interesting, especially when we start talking about creativity. So it's not only that we might lose certain creative capabilities, but it also might mean that we might also end up producing knowledge and content which is very far removed from the natural world which we want to inhabit when we start sort of converging outside of the gamut of worthwhile ideas. Now I'll talk a little bit about the Hinge of AI, or question mark, how we arrived at the Hinge of AI. So couple of notes about scale. So as mentioned, ChatGPT, 100 million users within the first 2 months and growing. What also happened a couple of weeks ago, and now we are discussing the last 3 weeks. During the same day, OpenAI released GPT-4, while Anthropic, a competitor, released Claude, while Stanford released Alpaca, which is a language model they created as a GPT-3 contemporary by using open source models leaked by Facebook or released by Facebook. Also, some of you might have seen the Microsoft Copilot, which is GPT-4 together with the Microsoft Office package. They have 345 million users and have started to roll out the GPT-4 capabilities. So we are looking at a very near future where 500 million users will have access to GPT-4, which is not trivial. Also, in the current form of model releases, there is the freemium format. So we are seeing a very low entry barrier into starting to use AI. And as well, especially from an educational point of view, we see that under 18s have access to these cognitive systems. And something fantastic happened last Thursday. As a physicist, I have been eagerly waiting for Wolfram Alpha. So first, OpenAI released GPT-4. There was some waves. Then Microsoft released Bing, which was GPT-4 plus internet. And last week, in all silence, OpenAI released their plug-in optionalities. OpenAI has more or less released an app store for ChatGPT. So now currently in your ChatGPT window, you can add apps like Wolfram Alpha or access to the internet to enhance your ChatGPT qualities. In terms of accelerating science, this might have an impact. So to recap, we've talked about the impact of global AI systems, how we might imagine how knowledge on the human side and machine learning side is gathered, and what might be some of the interplay of dynamics there, and mentioned some scale and cascading impacts, which might speak to our arrival into the age of AI. Now let's jump on to creativity in the 21st century. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this graph. So this is just about the number of PhDs growing globally. Of course, the world population is growing, so one should always adjust for that as well. But regardless of the background, we are just seeing that the amount of researchers, higher researchers, is growing rapidly. However, we are also seeing that papers and patents are becoming less disruptive over time. We have a diffusion of knowledge. It's actually really difficult to publish a paper today and make a splash. And there is even a question of, will we even have any scientific breakthroughs? Will we only make incremental progress? Now something more from this weekend. Just a raise of hands. How many of you have seen this picture? Lovely. So this weekend, as many of you certainly, I was reading the news and I came across this fantastic image of the Pope in fashionable gear, and I was not the only one to be astonished. Incredibly fashionable, right? But it was only that the white puffer coat is totally fake. So the image made an entrance, but this was in fact generated with generative AI. As you can see, the quality is quite high. There was an element of surprise here, an element of creativity, I think we could claim, quite fashion forward of the Pope, we started to think, when in fact this was AI generated. So we are seeing that our understanding of what is real and what is not is starting to really blend together. We're starting to wonder how much progress can we do in science, and is this just a diffusion of knowledge? Is there just a diffusion of creativity? But we are starting to see counterexamples. On the topic of then for us left to do is reacting versus responding. So recently there's been a lot of talk about AI displacing jobs, and then the counter push is that there's all these new jobs which are coming up. You can be a prompt engineer, or you can be a very AI native, AI digital member of society and contribute with these skills. And OpenAI even has, there is a little bit of a joke about OpenAI putting out an engineering ad for a kill switch engineer, an engineer whose only job is to turn off the AI in case it goes rogue. On the other hand, all this data which is being used to train these large models, it does often need to be annotated by humans, so we still have humans fine-tuning and humans moderating the content. And in fact, of the first, so the prompt engineer is a good example mentioned as that there is this new generation of jobs arriving to keep us challenged in the future. Just last week, I saw a research article where an AI agent was generating all the prompts better than a human prompt engineer, so this job will be replaced very soon as well, unfortunately. However, while we discuss these negative impacts or challenging impacts, another fantastic paper from a couple of weeks ago from MIT looked at the productivity effects of generative artificial intelligence, and I think this is something very interesting from a learning and creativity point overall. So the conclusion of this paper was that for workers who use ChatGPT for their work tasks, for workers of average or below capabilities, ChatGPT enhanced their work. They were able to create higher quality output. They felt sort of self-determination was more fulfilled. They felt that they were doing a good job at work. So we're in a very interesting time right now where we are seeing a lot of challenges, and also we are really starting to see what AI can create. We are seeing that this might actually be something that helps us to deal with inequality, which is something we're familiar with from education as well, how we can get everybody on board with AI teaching, AI assistants, as well as we see this very fast rotation of limitations and just society shaping. So to wrap up with some concluding remarks, as mentioned by Bill Gates and our host, the age of AI has begun, or at least this is the claim, but we are certainly living in very interesting times. ChatGPT has been with us for a couple of months now, but we are still somewhere trying to figure out how to react to it. So this was a reaction curve created to ChatGPT after it had been around for 2 months. From the initial wow effect to, wait a minute, it's like, what's in the background? Why does this work? Or, oh, well, it's not that good. To, okay, now I understand how it works. To us feeling comfortable with the current version of ChatGPT. And then GPT-4 arrived. And I'm happy to, comfortingly enough, to report to you that the word on the street is that GPT-5 is training. So it's a good moment in time to discuss learning and creation in terms of not only reacting to what is happening now, but looking to the future of how we want to define this. And a good example of creativity, where these two facets meet, is that a couple of months ago, there was a person who used AI to create a children's book in 1 weekend. This was a very busy professional person who didn't really have the time to write a book, but they wanted to write a book for their niece, I believe. And the backlash was immediate for this sort of, how dare he come to the domain of the children authors to create this content. And I would like us to have this thought with us over today. So sort of, is this children's book less creative because it was created together with generative AI or not? And where do we want to stand on that? Thank you.